how I break it down is into maybe three parts. So, sexual identity, sexual well-being, and sexual health, which kind of comes under the umbrella of sexual health. I mean, they can all be kind of interconnected. So the best way of describing it to me is if we think about sexual identity is, who am I? Oh, what do I like? What do I enjoy? What is my maybe sexual orientation? What are there any kind of kinks or fantasies that I have? Are there any things that I like, that I don't like, that I know about? The kind of sexual well-being is more like, how do I feel? How do I feel about my sexual self?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You are listening to Don't Be Afraid to Talk podcast with James. I believe if we are going to affect change, we must go back to the basic, which for me, in essence, is conversations. Talking and listening is key for growth, and I hope our stories will bring us together and we can draw inspiration from each other. Conversation will include topics such as mental and physical health, trauma and its effect, suicidal thoughts, recovery, and well-being. We will continue to raise awareness and offer a different perspective, a mindset or an idea that could inspire you to take charge of your well-being and to grow as a human being. Thank you for joining us today. Today I'm joined by Aoife. Aoife is a psychosexual and a relationship therapist who's based in Wicklow, Ireland. And today we're going to be discussing women's sexual health. If you are listening, have an open mind, and we hope you can learn something from this episode. Aoife, how are you?
I'm good. I'm delighted to be here. It's so nice to be able to chat to you, James, about a topic that is so important.
Yeah, this is, very important. Yeah.
And not spoken about enough in this country as well.
No, it's not spoken about. Even for me, like speaking about it, like, yeah, it's like, oh my God. So, how did I get here?
I know that.
Yeah.
I know that question.
Yeah, so how did I get here? But yeah, it needs to be spoken about, and that's what it is. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm a psychosexual and relationship therapist. I'm based in Wicklow, but actually I've been doing all my sessions online since COVID. And I had to be previously as well, because I was living in the UK and I offered face-to-face and online sessions. And so it wasn't really a big shift for me, luckily enough, when COVID hit. But it does really allow me to see people across the globe alongside in this wonderful green country. And it's it's a private practice, means I see individuals and couples, and I talk about kind of sexual and relationship issues that may be coming up for them that are impeding in their well-being and their mental health. I'm also a trauma therapist, so I work a lot with a type of trauma therapy called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So that's why we have an acronym for it. So I see people and help them through traumatic experiences that they may be having, and how to kind of alleviate that and learn to live a happier, healthier life.
Fantastic. Yeah, trauma. There's so much in that.
I know, you've covered it.
Oh, I just love it. I love talking everything in relation to trauma. It is so big, just so much under it. So, but yeah. Great. And before we get going on our topic today, we're going to play a quick game called 1 for 1. And I'll give you a word and you say the first word that comes to your mind.
I love it.
Okay. You ready?
Ready.
Yeah. The first one is chocolate.
Hot was the word that came to mind. Hot chocolate. I love hot chocolate.
Yeah. Yeah. Radio.
Station, which is not very imaginative. That's the first word that came to mind.
Violet.
Do you know, it's funny you say that because a violin came to mind. You said violet. I heard violin, and then I just thought of a purple violin.
No, violet, like the color violet.
The color.
Yeah.
Be a nice color violin.
Yes, yes. And cream.
Tea.
And the last one, and the last one is glow.
Stars.
Brilliant. That's it. Simple. That's the hardest question I'm going to be asking you today.
Good icebreaker.
Yes, yes. Okay, I'm just gonna have my drink. Okay, my first question is, how is sex and mental health connected? And what role does the nervous system play? Now, it's a big question, so.
It is a big question. It's a big question, and I think, what would I say about? I mean, I think it's a big question because I think it's quite subjective in one aspect. So sex and mental health, how our sex lives, our sexual selves, our sexual identity impact how we feel about ourselves in a psychological manner, how we feel like we relate in the world or to the world or connect with others. And that can be so vast, so individual, and so kind of nuanced, I suppose. And that is the crux of it all, really, with therapy. There's sometimes these big things that are kind of globally fitting for everybody, but actually then we have these individual experiences and what it's like for the person. So often what I see is things like so obviously this is a podcast, but some people will be watching as well. These little bunny ears that I might do every so often is sexual dysfunctions that come up for people. So I use dysfunctions in inverted commas because I don't like the label of it, and I feel like that word.
It sounds very big. It sounds like, yeah, the word itself.
Isn't it? It's like we're either functioning or we're dysfunctioning. But I feel that people do sense that when they're struggling with a sexual issue, so I tend to use the word issue or a challenge or a difficulty instead, that when people are experiencing a sexual issue, that it can be really corrosive to their self-esteem and it impacts anxiety and stress. And so often I will hear people coming to me saying, oh, I'm struggling with something like, I mean, we're talking about women's health, so it could be vaginismus, which is a form of pelvic pain. And I feel like I'm not able to go dating, or I can't connect with my partner, and that's causing me distress. Or it could be something like erectile dysfunction, erectile issues, and it might mean that this person feels that they feel a lot of shame about their sexual selves and feels shame about struggling to engage and have sexual experiences. So by proxy, that impacts our mental health. So it might cause anxiety, depression, or stress. And similarly, what often happens, I hear people coming into the room and they're struggling with things like OCD, or they might be struggling with a diagnosed mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar, in which case their sexual selves may be all tied up in the diagnosis and struggle with managing their medication even, and the impact that might have. So it is quite complex, but equally it's so important to bring it back to the person and what it's like for them, because nobody's the same.
Yeah, it's so individualized, but when you're having the say issues, you think it's only you. Yeah. And that probably why. Yeah, and it's always like you kind of think like, oh, no one else has the problem I have, type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And what role does the nervous system play in
Mm.
terms of when you're not regulated?
And I think that's a really good question. It's often when I'm bringing the big T word in, trauma, our nervous system is super triggered, right? So that sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, freeze. When we're in our sympathetic nervous system, things like dissociation may happen. Things like we might not be able to be in the moment. May not be present with our partners, feeling like we're in our heads or we're escaping somewhere else, or maybe our body is reacting in a way that we feel is out of our control. And so often our nervous system is directly interacting when we're experiencing any form of distress or overwhelm. Very interconnected with it, and a big part of what I would work with people is that grounding, that sense of centering themselves and getting themselves into that parasympathetic nervous system, easing down on that stress and anxiety.
Now, when you're not familiar with this, you just think there's something wrong with you.
Oh, completely.
It's like, why can't?
Yeah.
Or you start blaming yourself. Probably that often happens. You start blaming yourself, and then if your partner's not so understanding, it could be trouble.
Yes. And I heard this beautiful quote recently by a trauma therapist whose name escapes me at the moment, talking about PTSD and complex PTSD, or CPTSD. And one of the things he said is that blame turns to shame very quickly. So we move away from that sense of, oh, like something happening externally to it's happening internally. There's something wrong with me. I'm not normal. And that's a really hard place to be.
Yeah, once you get into shame, it's very difficult to get out of. Yeah. Great. My next question is, what's the easiest way to help people understand the sexual health? What women understand the sexual health?
How I break it down is into maybe 3 parts. So sexual identity, sexual well-being, and sexual health, which kind of comes under the umbrella of sexual health. I mean, they can all be kind of interconnected. So the best way of describing it to me is if we think about sexual identity is, who am I? What do I like? What do I enjoy? What is my maybe sexual orientation? What are there any kind of kinks or fantasies that I have? Are there any things that I like, that I don't like, that I know about? The kind of sexual well-being is more like, how do I feel? How do I feel about my sexual self? How do I feel about that identity? How do I look after myself in a kind of more psychological manner, where I see sexual health, although it fits into those other 2 categories, is also things like actually going to get checkups and thinking about things like STIs, or perhaps looking at those aspects such as sexual bunny ears here, dysfunctions.
Yeah.
So the kind of looking after your sexual health in a physical manner. So that to me is sometimes a good way of going, okay, well, I've got 3 maybe parts of me. There may be more. I think most people probably say they have more, but that's a good kind of basis or a foundation for it.
Now, the identity, that's something that, for example, for many people, because sex is still kind of shame, there's still a lot of shame around sex. So in terms of finding out your identity, so if you have this, grew up with this sense of shame when it comes to sex, do you find people struggle with that, of making that shift? Because it's not something that you like, it's not a conversation where you grew up talking about. So, and it's shamed by the culture. So do you find people struggle with finding out like things that they like themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I find that there's this kind of societal narrative that's almost been absorbed like osmosis,
Yeah.
particularly as in this kind of conversation that we're having tonight around women's sexual health, is this kind of narrative around who I'm supposed to be and the
Yeah.
expectations that you have on yourself, and how that's maybe come through some of the whether it's through Disney movies or Cosmo magazine, or just like conversations that happen in the kitchen, you know, or in the sitting room or at a bar, like, you know, that might be kind of shaming or unhelpful around how how liberated we can be in as women
Mm.
in society. And I don't think, I think that comes across all genders, but I think particularly for women, and I'm sure we can get into more around that in terms of the pleasure gap that's there still, or the kind of discrepancy amongst how we speak about women, and the kind of polarization of the Madonna and or complex. You know, there's a
Mm.
multitude of things that I think are very difficult for women to relinquish some of the kind of shackles, I suppose, of shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if you look at like studies that's been done over the years,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of it's kind of always been based on the male
Mm-hmm.
anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
Like very few have done studies on the female anatomy.
Yeah.
And is that because this, like, going back to like how women will perceive, do you think that kind of plays a part in that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That like when you talk about sex for women is always kind of, well, it's perceived as, oh, women are just kind of giving birth. It's
Completely.
not that stereotype idea, like it's still lingering around, unfortunately. And do you think things like that plays a part in the fact that there hasn't been many studies done on it?
Yeah. I mean, it's even. I mean, it's really interesting because um, it's only been in the last kind of 20 years where research even on mice have been done, female mice have been done, because um, scientists believed that the menses, so like the menstrual cycle of the mice, would female mice would get in the way of the studies. And as a result, what we found is that cardiac issues and heart attacks are different for women. The symptoms are different for women than they are for men. And so we're so far behind in studying women generally, let alone if we bring in sexual health and sexual well-being, because
Yeah.
then we've got this kind of idea, well, we're just this vessel. And
Mm.
you know, there was always this kind of thing of, well, there's no point to the female orgasm, when actually we know it contracts the uterus and actually could bring sperm towards up towards the uterus even. And so there's this kind of historical part of which message which is still there around
Mm.
us being unimportant, or studying us is unimportant to
Mm.
contribute.
I would have used a different word instead of unimportant, but yeah. Yeah. It's like women are just like a portal for like
Yeah,
for birth. And that's
completely.
just the way it's, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's really shown in the work that I do with women who are it's experiencing pelvic pain during sex. So people who kind of own vaginas tend to feel that, and this is obviously a generalization here, but I think it's a historic and a true one, is we're
Mm.
supposed to. This is supposed to hurt at times. This is supposed to be uncomfortable. That's part of it. And so
Mm.
it's really not until the last few decades, if not less, um, that people are going, no, actually it's not okay to put up with painful sex, and you know, you should get treated and support around that. That's not part of the sexual experience. It's certainly
Yeah.
not part of the sexual experience.
Mm. Definitely. That obviously like that kind of thinking obviously still influences people in terms of the shame for women to kind of seek help, for example. It's still like taboo subject. Yeah.
Exactly.
And yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Thank you. We move on to our next question. That's only question 2. Sorry. And what causes low sexual desire in women?
Yeah. A multitude of things. I think partly, which is super important, and maybe some of these questions, even as I'm talking through them, will end up being answered, like, because I'll probably talk a lot and cover a lot because I have a tendency to waffle. But one of the big things is this expectation around women and who they should be in the bedroom, or who they should be as a sexual being. So what's coming to light more and more is the impact of pressure, societal narratives, and the discourse around women being free to be themselves. And so what the research has told us is that a lot of it, unfortunately, is the patriarchy. So low libido is kind of correlated to those societal expectations. And I mean, that's one part, and those are the kind of that's kind of more of the social constructivism, I suppose. But then we've also got the practical, pragmatic parts of it. So things like menopause, really simple one. The impact of testosterone level in women. So sometimes think, what? I have testosterone? Yes, most of us do have testosterone in our bodies, and that it's an important part of it's an important hormone that does impact our desire alongside estrogen. Then we also have to think of things like TSH, so our thyroid levels as well. Underactive thyroid can impact libido, alongside another hormone that's really, really neglected in the conversations is a hormone called prolactin, which is made in our pituitary gland. So that could be a hormone if a low level that isn't kind of conducive to our sexual well-being. So often it's kind of discussed in breastfeeding or after birth, but it's something that we can that we have the whole time in our body. But if it's impacted, stress, for example, that can also impact our prolactin levels, which in turn impacts our desire.
I have heard about the afterbirth and breastfeeding also can play a part in desire. Is that because, okay, these are terms I've never heard of. Is that because when you're breastfeeding is affecting what's happening there? Sorry, I'm not really.
What's happening with the breastfeeding?
Yeah.
In terms of hormones, well, in breastfeeding, you release prolactin. Your prolactin levels can be impacted, and so in turn that would impact the libido. So it's
Okay.
It's so but I do also think that, I mean, there's a lot to be said, and I actually just kind of contributed towards an article recently around post-birth and the impact of giving birth and stress on the body image, healing following birth, traumatic birth, which isn't spoken about enough either, and how that psychologically impacts how we feel sexually.
Totally, yeah. And then you have the society pressure of how you should be and how a woman should be, and all that comes with it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can't really escape those, unfortunately. Yes. My next question is, why do women seem to battle more with sexual desire? And how can we start overcoming this?
Can you repeat that for me, James?
how do women seem to battle more with sexual desire as to compared to men, for example?
Okay.
Is that because there's a lot more happening in the female body?
Yes. So I think there's a lot more happening in the female body. I think there's it kind of comes back again to what I was saying about those expectations and the shoulds. And I think there's quite a famous app that made a post recently. I shall keep them nameless. And they made a post recently talking about the complexity of female orgasms. And I challenged them on that because I think this is part of the narrative that we keep having, which is there's something complicated about women. And
Yes.
actually, it's not that we are more complicated necessarily than men. It's exactly what you said earlier. We haven't been given scope to be understood. So, for example, there was only one study that was done on the clitoris. And that study, which had been quoted for years, was done on a cow.
Oh.
So so there was this quote that was going around, and maybe people have heard it who listened to this, which is there's 8,000 nerve endings in a clitoris. Well, actually, that clitoris that was studied was a bovine, which is a type of cow or bull, I think.
I've actually heard of that expression.
You have? Right.
Yeah.
Bull, but a cow. Yeah. But anyway, so this is a big bit of misinformation that was going around, and it was only about I think it was October where a study was officially done where they have found about 10,000 nerve endings in the clitoris. So it was actually done on a real clitoris owned by a human. And I think that's what is so important is, yet again, this kind of ostracization and almost othering of women, and they're too complex, and so we won't give them space. And then we neglect to be able to understand women holistically. So I think it's kind of this sense that is misconstrued, that women are complex, when actually we haven't been listened to and heard enough.
Yeah, I was listening to a doctor who talks about this kind of stuff, and she was saying when she was studying the anatomy, a lot of it was just male focused. She wanted to study the female, but it was like, yeah, we don't do that here. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So far behind, and it's not isolated to sexual health.
And that kind of generalization plays a big part, especially for men, for example. You just think, oh no, that's it's too much information for me to gather.
Yeah, too much information. I'll just give up and I'll just do my way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this is what I know, so I'm sticking with that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Brilliant. So how can we start kind of breaking that stigma? Is it just kind of conversations, and education is a big part?
Huge part. Yeah.
And I don't think the sex education we get in school is that great, to be honest.
Absolutely not. And it's very it's very biology based as well. It's very practical based. I think when I have done a good bit of lecturing in DCU, and they're like one of the classes I have been teaching is the third year health and social care students. And it's interesting for me as somebody who's obviously older, just a few years, these kind of 20, 21-year-olds are still just depleted in sex education, the very fundamentals of things. And even one of the big things we talk about is, which is a pet peeve of mine and many other sex educators, is the difference between a vagina and a vulva. And we're not even labeling women's anatomy appropriately,
No.
correctly. And it's
No.
how are we facilitating any form of conversations when we're not getting the basics right? Like we teach the difference between the throat and the neck, but yet we kind of almost shroud it in this one word fits all that isn't even the correct word. So the sex education is far too basic. It is changing, but it's not changing fast enough or well enough, and I think we also it's very kind of male dominated as well. Maybe things like more wet dreams are discussed, but erections might be discussed, but female pleasure isn't. Or that similarly, as women, we can have kind of the equivalent of wet dreams, and none of that's really openly discussed, I think. And so we've got these young people coming through the ranks who aren't getting the support that they so deserve.
Even with female pleasure, that's just like, I think it's just like a big X, like, oh, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about it. So people just kind of grow up with this is what happens, like that part is not, it's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant. And then, as we know as well, where do kids learn their sex ed from? They turn to porn, which is super accessible. And, as much as there's a space for porn in the world, it's not to be used as a form of sex education, because it's giving unnecessary expectations, but also can be causing harm to young people who don't know how to use it in an appropriate way.
Did it even, I think even in TV shows and most movies, like the sex scene would be pretty much male focused, even.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks volumes, I think, and how it kind of reinforces
they're thinking, it's like, this is what it is, and we don't talk about the other stuff, and it's too complex. So, too complex.
Thing.
It's like, what do you call that? And this, and after by the third part, it's like, I'm lost. Yeah. So a lot to be done on education. Some of that, would you think a lot of that would be more parents' role to do? Because I think we rely on schools, and I personally don't think it's great what they're teaching people. But should that be more of the parents' role?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I would suggest anybody who's listening, there's a wonderful soul called Sarah Sproul who does such incredible work and workshops with parents, and I would definitely recommend it, because parents do have a role to play. The problem, I think, with parents is that A, they may not have the sex education, the appropriate sex education, that B, they're super nervous, or
it's like
or C, the shame is there. They're just own shame, so they end up projecting it onto their children, in which case your children are going to grow up and hear these kind of biases, perhaps. It could be a bit of fear mongering if it's not impartial. This sense of, I don't want you getting pregnant, and so it's very focused on kind of harm minimization almost, rather than this nice, lovely opening of conversations. But I'm sure Sarah would agree, as the expert in this field, that it all needs to start from an early age. It needs to start from those conversations around consent, in like, asking kids or not requiring kids to do or act in certain ways with strangers, or informing them about their bodies, teaching them the right words for their genitals, encouraging a space to be able to approach a parent and feel safe to do so. And all of these are different aspects to a parent who feels brave enough to talk about these difficult conversations with kids.
Even the questions like, a child might ask, like, where do babies come from? And you just you just stress straight away. It's like, I
Yeah.
don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. I know, and that's where you also have to know what age appropriate, what you
Yeah,
can and can't say, and to the what age kids can absorb certain information on anyway.
yeah, yeah. Like, I'll tell you in 2 years, in 3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that could be too late.
yeah, yeah. The way the world's moving, anyway.
Absolutely.
Yes. My next question is: what are some of the what are some of the causes of vaginal pain?
Okay, so vaginal pain can be a multitude of reasons. So we kind of got everything from bladder issues, so kidney issues like UTIs or appendicitis. Of course, that's an extreme one, but one nonetheless. Ovarian cysts, endometriosis, and then also things like nerve damage, nerve pain, and then we've also got, which is quite common, and something I see quite often is tense pelvic floor muscles. So either that they're tense or that they spasm. So yeah, that those are kind of some of the main things that might come up. Obviously, then an injury of some form as well.
Mm,
Often when, like anything, if we've experienced pain, we kind of want to avoid it. And the thought of that pain happening again might mean that we start tensing up.
mm,
So, for example, an easy way of describing it is some of us hold tension in our jaw or in our shoulders. And likewise, some people hold it in their pelvic floor and their pelvic region. So what might happen is somebody who's holding their pelvic tension in their pelvic floor have a tight vaginal opening or tight pelvic floor. It might spasm, and so there's some anxiety perhaps there around the possibility of penetration happening. And then sometimes penetration, there's an attempt, and then it actually is painful. So we've got a cycle
okay.
happening, and so it's multitude of reasons. And so one of the great things about pelvic floor is that there are pelvic floor physios in this country who are absolutely wonderful and really supportive. So a gynecologist, a pelvic floor physio, and not everybody needs a psychosexual therapist, but perhaps a psychosexual therapist as well, is a great way to just start getting on the road to treatment and support.
Mm. It's not really something, I know, like with pain, it's not really something you can put off. Like, it's like,
Pain.
oh, yeah. As much as we like to avoid it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't tend to be a pain that is consistently there. What often
Okay.
happens is it's triggered. So with the use of a tampon or a pap smear, cervical smear, or penetration or intercourse, that's when it tends to be particularly painful. And there's different types of that too. There's vaginismus, which is kind of like a spasming of the wall, and the wall tenses up with the vagina. And so often people do say it's literally like a wall. It's like nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to enter. There's dyspareunia, and there's different types of dyspareunia as well, which is kind of on about more pelvic pain itself rather than the inability to penetration. And then there's also a type called vulvodynia as well. So we've got like pelvic pain vulva on the vulva, which also there are many different parts and different types of that too. So always get checked out in a holistic way.
Mm. Mm. Most of these words I never heard of.
And I'm using them purposely without trying
No,
to
that's great.
it be depth about it, but I also want people to know their words for this, because I cannot stress how often, because we've heard of erectile dysfunction, we've heard of premature ejaculation, we've heard of delayed ejaculation. This is
There's ads on TV for it.
right.
Yeah, it's like
They're everywhere. Right?
it's like watching the football the other day, and an ad came on. I was like,
Really?
Yeah.
That's funny. And it's similar to, like you said about the movies, is how often have we seen movies where somebody loses their erection, or they came too quickly or whatever. How have we ever seen a movie where a woman, I can name one TV show where they have been unable to have penetrative sex because there's tightness
Is
up their pelvic floor? No.
is that House of Dragons?
No, it's not House
No.
of Dragons. It's
No.
called Unorthodox, and it's a TV show
Oh
on
no.
Netflix about
Okay.
Orthodox Jewish community in New York. So it's quite interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of words I've never heard of. Yeah, like that. Like my education when it comes to this has been not great. So
But this
that's
is the
why.
thing. That's all part and parcel, James. That's not on you. That's a societal thing.
And when you're talking about the pain, the pelvic floor, I'm
Mm,
guessing that's just a case of, well, one trying to find the right physio. It's more to it, but trying to find the right physio and
yeah,
doing your own exercise type of thing to kind of help
yeah, yeah.
get rid of that pain.
Yeah, so you would go to a physio. Sometimes we would cross refer. So often I may say to somebody, if here's a client, go to a physio. There's great physios here. Here's one particularly in your area, or somebody that I know. And similarly, physios will cross reference back to us if somebody needs something more psychological. And the pelvic floor physios, what they do is they do an assessment. So as therapists, we wouldn't be doing assessments. So they do an assessment and they get a really thorough understanding of what's happening for the person. And then we do a little thing called the client is a thing, or sometimes with the physio is dilating, which is apparatus, which I've got back there, but I won't bring out. I'll disturb the whole thing, our whole session. But it's basically exercising those muscles, in learning how to relax them. And yet again, there's a lot of misinformation around Kegel exercises, that normally, and maybe that's another word, James, that you're not too sure of. But so sometimes there's misinformation around what we should be doing. And so what I would be saying to somebody is, don't make it up, don't go Googling stuff, go and have yourself checked out and get somebody who's actually a professional. And then I would work a lot with cognitive behavioral therapy, the breath work, grounding techniques, understanding anxiety, and maybe the bigger picture of what might be happening for the person too.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I'll move on to my next question. Just give me one. What? Yeah, sorry. Question 7 is, sorry. What is the sexual process for a woman that would lead to satisfying sexual experience, and whether it's by herself or with a partner?
Yeah. So I would be suggesting that if anyone who there's this kind of, okay, let's split that into two maybe. So maybe let's talk about individual sexual experiences. So masturbation. Firstly, explore yourself and your vulva, because unlike cis men, it's kind of we're kind of covered up, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important on a very physiological level to actually explore what your vulva looks like. And that's super important in case there are any changes, and just in terms of being mindful that there isn't something sinister happening. So go get a little pocket mirror and explore what it looks like. Every single one of the vulvas in this whole world is different. No two are alike. We're all unique, and they're all wonderful. So there's a lot of shame, and we know this from porn, then again, of these perfect little vulvas that we see. They're all unique, they're all different. So explore what that looks like, explore what your clitoris looks like, explore touch, and that doesn't have to be isolated to the vulva as well. Get in the shower, notice how the water feels on your skin, notice what it's like to be around the steam, notice what it's like when you're touching yourself in the shower just with your own shower gel. It's the same when you get out of a towel, put it around you. What's the different touch that you like, the different pressures, the different textures, etc. So yet again, kind of bringing this into a lifestyle rather than it being this one specific thing that I need to be doing, which is
yeah,
is kind of
every couple of months.
Exactly. But getting in and exploring and being curious about yourself. And a big thing that's been, I think, for women is around the vagina, and this kind of expectation that we're supposed to climax through vaginal orgasms. That's about 8% of the population. The clitoris.
It's very low.
Yeah. So 8% can orgasm through the vagina in itself. So we might have heard around the G-spot, and I'm supposed to be orgasming through the G-spot. Well, actually, we've discovered that the G-spot is basically the back of the clitoris. So the clitoris is a whole world that still needs to be explored.
It's a whole different, yeah. Okay.
So that's focus on the clitoris externally. Get yourself a little toy. Shauna from Sex Shoppa is fantastic. www.sexshoppa.ie. Shout out Shauna. And she will actually genuinely help you with picking out a toy and what you need. So get a little bullet, little vibrator. That's sometimes a really helpful, nice way of just enjoying a sexual experience with yourself. In terms of with a partner, I think what's absolutely crucial to remember is that communication is vital. So I always say communication, curiosity, kind of consideration or compassion are super, super important in having a good sexual experience. And often when I say that, and I say like 3 and sometimes 4 C's, depending on how many C's I give, somebody always goes consent. I just want to stress that consent is not one of the C's, because if there is no consent, it's sexual assault. Like consent is should be a factual part of a sexual experience. So with the C's that I have, I think it's super important that you kind of communicate with each other, but that means that you must have learned about what feels good for you, and be brave to open up and explain that and talk about that to a partner, and hopefully your partner would do the same.
So many I can pick from that.
I know, sorry. But I know we don't have all day.
Just in terms of, okay, with the partner. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know what you like, so don't expect them to know what you like.
Yeah, it's like if you can't. Okay, I don't eat mushrooms, but if I don't tell somebody I don't eat mushrooms and they make me mushroom soup, that's on me, right?
Yeah, it's like, I didn't know.
Yeah, so I'm saying, I don't like mushroom soup, but just FYI for next time.
Yeah.
Like I'm being a little bit facetious here, but like we've got to communicate that. We've got to be able to talk about how we like our cup of tea. With like sugar and strong or weak or all the gradients in between. Asking for that, why would we expect a good sexual pleasurable experience if we don't talk about what we actually enjoy? And part of that is, learning,
knowing what you
yourself.
Yeah, and then if you have a lot of shame around the whole sex, it could be difficult for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the problem is people expect mind reading too much. They're supposed to just know.
It's like,
know what I like.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you don't know, and then the other person start feeling bad because they don't really know, and it's like, well, you're not telling me.
Exactly, your catch-22 situation. And I think what you did say about the shame is super important, and I don't ignore that at all. But that's why I'm saying start in the shower. Start really simple. Keep it easy and self-compassionate. Just notice what the shower is like, and that's a really good basis.
Yeah, shame is a big one when it comes to sexual experience. Definitely. And my last question is, how can I be more supportive of my partner's experience if my partner is experiencing issues and around sexual desire, and I don't want to use the word dysfunction,
Yeah.
but yeah.
If they're struggling.
If they're struggling, yeah. So how can I be more supportive?
I would say the best thing is listening. And I mean really listening, right? That kind of active
Listening.
where you're going into it rather than pottering around the kitchen at the same time, or picking up your phone as we tend to do, or the TV on in the background. Is sitting with them, putting devices aside, putting alcohol or substances or drugs, put that all to aside as well. So do it when you're very much present with each other, and listen and ask, be curious about how that makes them feel. What's that like for you? That sounds difficult. So how do you experience that? How does that make you feel? And then hopefully what you can do is you can gain a better understanding of that experience for them, and then say, okay, well, how can I help? What would be most useful for you as I sit here with you? What would be most useful for you in the future? How do we engage with initiating sex? Do you want me to do it? Would it be helpful if I used a certain word? If I didn't, would it be helpful if I used like a gradient between 0 and 10? How much in the mood are you? And okay, you're at a 0. That's okay. How do you feel about holding hands? So, just making sure that you're creating an open, kind, compassionate environment. And then affirming that it's great that if they do seek help, that you're there for them and that you listen to them, and that there's space, that it's a together thing. Because that's the big thing that us as relationship therapists talk about, is the importance of taking blame out of the equation. And when it comes to sexual issue, it's an us issue. If it's on one person, then normally the therapy doesn't go so well. There's a lack of
it's hard to understand empathy if you're only talking to one person, because the other person is not there to have an input. Yeah, it's like
yeah. And often then somebody comes in and goes, it's me, I have to fix it. No, it tends to be dynamic. It always tends to be dynamic, and the healing process needs to be dynamic.
Yeah. This sounds more of a we need to talk conversation. It's like, we need to talk. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, exactly.
What did I do?
Exactly.
And just on that listening, because I know men struggle with listening. We do try. On it. Like, first of all, the conversation is not easy. So just to kind of more understand, if you're having this conversation with your partner, that it's harder for her to be having this conversation with you anyway. Even though you may not understand most of it, but it's just about being there and being supportive.
Absolutely. And I think many people, including men, have a habit of fixing, wanting them to fix it.
Yes.
Better. Okay, how do I solve this for you? And I would be always suggesting people to say, what do you need? What is helpful? Rather than, do you want me? Sometimes it has to be as practical as, what do you want me to do right now? Is this a fix it situation?
Yeah.
Listen situation? Is this a hug situation? And make it that explicit, make it that clear.
Yeah, I think for men it's like that. When you hear is like your mind thinking, okay, how can we fix this now? It's like jumping straight to like, oh, we have to fix this, instead of just sitting there and just actually listening, not thinking of like what's going on.
And sometimes that unfortunately kind of reinforces the shame. Then if we fix things of going, you're broken, I need to fix you. There's something wrong with
Yeah.
you. Need to, you need to be fixed. And we really want to move away from that and go, hold on, what's happening? Just what's happening is enough sometimes. How do I help with that?
And look at it in the approach that it's our issue, if you like. Yeah. It's not an issue that one person's having.
It's not a you issue, it's an our issue.
Yeah.
Lovely,
yeah. Fantastic. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all my question in relation to women's sexual health. I have 2 more questions for you. That's not related to this. So my first one is, if you were to go to therapy, what would your ideal therapist be like?
If I went to therapy, what would my ideal therapist? Well, my therapist is my ideal therapist. She's wonderful.
Okay. Okay.
And I like her a lot because my personal experience with her is that she gives me a lot of space to talk, because I process by talking. And she's also challenging of me. And I do really like that in a way that's empathic and caring. So to me, my therapist, who I'm very lucky to have, and she's also my cheerleader, which I love.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And did you find her straight away, or did you try a few?
No, I had a few therapists over the years, since teenage years, and never clicked with any of them. We're fine, but no,
you just
I hate to say this, but I just knew by her picture. I read her picture and I was like, I saw her picture.
Yeah.
Like, she's the one.
Yeah. Some people, you just go into a room, you're like, yeah, I feel easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Sweet. And my last question is, what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, do you know, and it's a pity I don't have it in here, because my way of doing mindfulness is painting. I love painting, and I am terrible at it. And I know people would be maybe saying, well, art is subjective, or, you're not. It
is.
And I'm probably not a very good therapist right now by saying, I am terrible at it.
Yeah, poor choice of words. Yeah.
But I actually embrace the fact that I'm not that good. And what is great about it is I paint, and then it's not very good. It's in my head. It doesn't come out on the paper or on the canvas. And then I just paint over it again. And then I paint over and I paint over. And it's just one of my favorite things to do. It's just like absorb myself in these yeah.
Brilliant. Paint art is subjective. Some of the stuff people sell, you're like, what is that?
That's why I thought I could be an artist.
Yeah,
it's like, this is just like one like slab or something.
Yeah, like this.
Thousands.
Like, you paid that? You pay how much for that?
No. Funnily enough.
But yeah, fantastic. Okay, sorry. I just have to bring my mind back to where I am. Okay, let's go.
You got this.
Oh, this screen looks different. Why does it look different? If you enjoyed today's episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a quick review on my Facebook page, Don't Be Afraid to Talk, or DM me on Instagram. The show notes will include all of the relevant links from today's episode. If you haven't already, please download, leave a rating, and share with your friends. You might just reach that person who needs to hear this message. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I am James Lumumba, signing off with gratitude.